affect, the campground side of the business. The modules within the system and the way it's architected, I don't want to get into too many details, do separate those functions. So while we are continuing to make changes on the hunt and fish side for VRS and HRS and other functions that are in the project plan, it doesn't really affect how the campground systems work. Sometimes there's unintended consequences on that side, but it's very rare. So we're pretty confident as we move forward, continuing to enhance the deliverables on the hunt and fish side, that the campground side will be fine.
One quick question, follow up Commissioner Bray's comment. Is there, you don't have to answer this today, but I think that it would be very helpful for this commission to kind of understand limitations. From a policy perspective, if we make decisions about what we'd like to see that we offer to our customers or the rules for our customers, which ones are more in the realm of fairly easy to do, more minor modifications, versus ones in terms of structure that would take more extensive time to complete. Mm-hmm. And any guidance you can give to Corey or our staff about that, because otherwise we're kind of in the dark about it. We'd like to make this change, and we don't know whether that's a 30-day change or a 30-month change.
Sure.
To make that requires a restructuring of the entire database to accomplish something for
it's
the
often
customers here that we're representing.
Excuse me. It's often the case that something that looks small is in actual fact very difficult, and conversely, something that looks very difficult can actually be quite small because of the way the system's put together. So, yeah, I'll let Corey take the answer too.
And for the record, Corey Chick. Commissioner McDaniel, I can meet with yourself or any commissioner for that matter, because currently the system is built to the contract, or at least that's what we're gearing to build the system to, is the contract. It is hard for me without calling a spare to sit there and say how big one of those would be, but having that communication on, or at least lead time on potential changes, I definitely could have those answers prior to, and be able to answer them on the commission floor instead of having to run in the back and make a call. But
last question. Sorry, I'm kind of monopolizing time here. One last question. You hear anything yesterday about the changes we made in qualifying licenses, or others that would give you pause? Because we made some decisions yesterday, which I'd like to understand do you see as problematic from a Spirit's perspective, or yours, Corey?
And I've checked with the Spirit, and everything that was approved yesterday can be accomplished in the time frame we need.
Okay, and then my final comment goes to I guess I said it was final, but it wasn't yet. I had one more, and that is around Seth. I really appreciate the commitment on the governor's report. We talked about that at our last meeting. Whatever is really necessary to reconcile that, to get to those within the next, I'll call it, few weeks, not by the next meeting. So what we can get financials on a monthly basis is really should be job one. I just can't emphasize it anymore. You've gotten it down to $1.3 million, which is great, but that's still a lot of money to get down to the bottom. Get to our report, to our final report. So. That emphasis, I appreciate the commitment about that, Seth, to get that done as soon as possible.
Corey, I'd like to have a call, and I checked with the director about this, for all the commissioners in December, and we don't have to have a Spirit, but I just want to check in with you.
Okay.
And commissioners, you're all invited. Commissioner McDaniel and I need to be on that call, so we will be on the call. But I'd just like to have it scheduled just as an update, just so that there's no surprise, because we don't meet till January. So if you could just work with staff to get that call, I would think half an hour would be plenty. And whenever it's convenient for Commissioner McDaniel's schedule and mine would be great. And then we'll invite everyone else as well. Commissioner Zimmerman.
Sorry, Corey, did you have a response?
Hey, the only thing I was going to add, Chairman, if it's okay too, I think it would be prudent, probably a couple months prior to leftover data, potentially have a Spirit back to make sure that everything that or the Aspira has been working on, at least so that we have the understanding and the commission can feel more comfortable going into a leftover license day again, that everything has been taken into account that can be, so that we don't have a repeat.
I was making the assumption, Corey, in our January and March meeting that we'd see Aspira. I don't know we need to see the entire team, but
Okay.
because it's just such a critical period. So that's my suggestion to commissioners. See a lot of nodding heads. So I'll look forward to seeing them in January and March. And then we'll just do an update call. You're welcome to invite Aspira or not. That's not really important to me. It's just I don't want to find out in January that there's been an issue open for a month.
Sure.
Right. Commissioners, Commissioner Zimmerman, please.
There was I'm not sure which meeting it was, we talked about the park passes and the new printers that were being ordered. I know I had expressed a concern about when those new printers would be available, because I know from park passes, sometimes those are purchased as gifts. So around the holiday period, I thought we talked about, I just am curious if there's an update on when those printers, when that new paper might be available.
In that, Commissioner Zimmerman, that was actually part of the update that Steve gave, that we've already started rolling out those printers.
Okay.
Currently, is it?
So that applies to the park passes as well. Okay.
We heard you, because at the original schedule we said it was February, and you asked for it to be before Christmas, Thanksgiving. We've already rolled out one wave to offices of the state that covers about 70% of all of those document types that were ever done. There will be a second wave at the end of this month, which will cover about 99% by volume of all of the faded documents. So, basically, the first wave's done. The second wave is in another 2 or 3 weeks.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay.
Does that include licensing agents as well?
It does not include license agent, but it does include the Aspira's fulfillment. So we're going to, due to these type of printers, I'm not comfortable having those with our license agents. So we're working on a different way to address that. And it'll probably be more to something like printing a temporary, and then that will be fulfilled through Aspira on these good printers that don't fade.
Thank you. I'm just going to, unless anyone else has anything, I just wrap up. Mr. Trevette, could I just ask you to come up? You know, in a former life, 20 years ago, I was Deputy General Counsel at Accenture, so I kind of have been on the other side of the podium where you're standing, where you have a troubled install, and oftentimes the partner would get changed out and the team would get changed out. So I feel like I've seen this before, and you know, they pull me in because the client would be upset, and I would always tell them is, I can't fix this, right? If you guys perform, it'll be fixed, and all the legal issues go away. And so for me, the most important message, I think, is that this draw go really well. I'm not saying perfect, but I mean, our customers need to be telling us that, hey, this is a way better experience than last year. Same thing on the leftover draw. So I just want to emphasize for you, that's the solution. And if we can get there, I think a lot of things will change pretty rapidly for the positive between your company and us. If we don't get there, you know, it'll be 2 years in a row where it's been a really difficult experience for our customer. So I just want to emphasize that high level measure is important.
Completely understand. Thank you for the feedback.
Thanks. Great, thank you very much. Danielle, I think you're up next. Commissioners, we have a slight cleanup to yesterday's preference point qualifying license discussion. Danielle, do you want to lay that out, or would you like me to summarize it?
I can lay it out.
Please.
For the record, Danielle Eisenhart, Regulations Manager for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I believe the clarification that staff is seeking from the Commission is what your intent was on the reduction price for non-resident bear licenses. The motion that you approved was to have it be $100 for the concurrent rifle bear and the PLO bear licenses. but I've heard afterwards that perhaps you intended to have it be $100 for all non-resident bear licenses. So just seeking clarification on that issue from the commission.
Commissioner Bray.
It was my intention for all licenses, all bear licenses, when I made the motion. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on that, I guess. But.
The explanation for how we got here is that we started with staff's recommendation and then amended it. And so what happened, Robert, was since staff's recommendation was more limited than all bear licenses, the subsequent motion, wasn't as wide as we wanted. But I agree, it was certainly my intent, I think other commissioners' intents. To clean it up, I think we should do it, rather than just give you a clarification, I think we should do a motion. Council, I assume you agree with that. So, Robert, could I invite you to make a motion on this limited issue around the bears?
Sure. I would move to make all bear licenses for all seasons. I guess that's clear.
Non-resident.
For non-residents, $100.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Vigil.
Second.
Oh.
Second.
Or Commissioner Garcia then. Any public comment? Any further discussion? Very good. Let's do this by voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank
And
you,
if I
Dan.
may, I have one other clarifying question on the preference points on whether you want turkey applicants to also be required to purchase a qualifying license in order to apply for turkey applications. We've mostly focused our discussion yesterday on big game, so I just wanted to be clear on the intent of the commission for turkey applicants.
Commissioners, any thoughts on that?
I guess I would have a question. Is there a preference point creep in Turkey?
I don't believe we're as concerned about preference point creep for turkeys.
I don't have an issue then.
I don't think we discussed that yesterday. And I think if we were to do that, and it's just a suggestion, but I would think we'd want to give notice and have an opportunity for folks in the turkey community to talk.
Yeah, I would, I'd be in favor of not requiring turkey at this point. I mean.
So Danielle, I don't think we've addressed that.
Okay. So I will just leave the application fees that you approved for turkey, but no preference point fee for turkey, and no requirement for a qualifying license to apply for turkey.
Correct.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. Next up is Mr. Craig Workman on our large cap to listing current large cap. Commissioners, while Craig's coming up, can I just talk a little bit about our coming year and a couple of ideas that I have and get some feedback? I think we got a lot of positive feedback on our forums last year. Commissioner Taylor, you were one of our panelists, so I invite your comment. But I'd like to do a couple more in the first half of the year, and I want to just take, what I would do is give you the kind of the 30,000 foot here. I'll work with staff, and then I'll report in January on how things are progressing, and then you can steer me in January. But the two forums I'd like to focus in on is, I'd like to have what I'm calling an urban forum. I'm sure we'll come up with a better name, but last year's outreach, we did not get into the urban corridor in Denver and some of those places, into some of the communities that we were really hoping to have participate. And I don't think that's surprising. I think we need to go to those communities. And so we have, I think, and I'd like to work with staff on this in our March meeting, which will be in Denver. I'd like to see if we can't do some of that meeting, whether that's in Aurora or Denver, where we're going to the communities that we're seeking input from. And a lot of it would be similar to the structure of it, in my mind at least. How do we get these communities more involved in the park system? We're really building on the director's outreach for things like the Cherry Creek, what was the name of that? The Expo?
Yeah, the Outdoor Expo.
So it's just an attempt, again, to get to these communities that are very important to us, and yet we're still not getting as deep. So that's one idea. The second forum I'd like to try and organize is just on the opposite side. It's a rural forum, and I'd like to target that for the May meeting in Grand Junction. And here what we'd be trying to do is really delve into some of the issues that we hear about all the time, when good neighbor issues, those types of things, other things that we could be doing better in rural Colorado. And you know, Commissioner Bray and Commissioner Vigil, I want to pull you into that in the way that I pulled other commissioners into the planning. And those would be the two that I'd like to try and do. Again, we'd be focused on getting panelists that are not folks that generally talk to us. And if those two ideas, if there's another idea, I'd be very interested in getting those concepts from you. But I'd like to try and have those forums happen in March and then in May. So I can see staff out there groaning from all the conference calls with me. But that will be, if that's agreeable, then that's what I'll work on with staff between now and January. Any thoughts?
That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Great, I see not.
Rural is.
Well, we'll work on that.
I know the bounds of a city, but rural is like everywhere.
We will work on that. I will look to your guidance, Commissioner Vigil. Just a couple other things then. I had a really traumatic event happen on the Capitol last year in the middle of the Future Generations bill. We went to a sportsman's caucus in which I was hoping that nobody said anything because the bill was so close to going through and I didn't want to see it derailed. And a good friend of the commission, Dick Ray, stood up. We had a lot of legislators in the room and gave a presentation on mountain lions. And I was just beside myself. I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to have all this controversy. The bill's going to go down. The exact opposite happened. Dick gave a presentation that was a celebration of the mountain lion. It never touched on policy. And what it did was it reminded me very much why we're here, right? Which is we're here not just to think about mountain lions from different perspectives and ideologies. We're here to preserve this animal. And it's a wonderful animal. And it was so exciting to have that discussion as opposed to have the fights that we so often have around predators. And so one of the things I want to think about is there a way for us to do a presentation science-based, but not so much about policy, so that the next time this predator comes up, we're all on the same page about, you know, what a great animal this is. What is its biology? What is it on the landscape? How does it relate to our history? And that's a very ambitious plan because it almost always seems to create controversy, but I'd like to see if I can't work on that and come up with something where we can talk about predators in a positive way. If I can't get that structured correctly, then we won't do it, but I'd be interested in others' thoughts on that.
John, in what forum? In one of our meetings?
It would be in one of the meetings. Commissioner Garcia for the record, but I can see some of the same fear that I had when I saw Dick present. But so that's another idea I'll work on and report back to you in January. Last then,
Just a
Commissioner
comment.
Vigil.
You know, we know the lions are controversial, so I think the best thing is to face it. So I'm not opposed at all to having a discussion and a presentation by Dick Ray, if that's what we want to do. Talk about mountain lions. I mean, they're here.
Yeah, and we would have is my practice, the way I would plan it would be that we would have people from across the spectrum come and talk. And the only thing I'd ask them to do is not turn it into, what I like to call a predator riot, where we're off fighting, we're not talking about the animal, we're talking about various other things. And so as long as folks will sign up for that, I'd be glad to have anyone come and present as part of the process. Director, I probably put 10 years on you right now. Okay, any other thoughts? I'm seeing some nodding heads, but I'm not. Commissioner Vigil.
Are you talking about a forum or just a presentation?
I don't think it's a forum, Jim. I think it's more, we would have just a very granular discussion about this animal, right? We would invite outsiders in, but it's not going to be where we have, I think we had 12 or 11 the last time with a moderator. That's not really what I'm after.
Right, okay. That's better.
I think, you know, obviously if we ask some members of the public to present, then we've got to open that up for everybody. But anyhow, I just wanted to do something that reminds us why the lion is such a cool animal. Okay. Last thing I just wanted to ask all of you about is one of the things I did over the course of the last year is I really pressed staff to have PowerPoint be a tool and not the presentation. And so we're having a lot shorter presentations, a lot shorter PowerPoints, and consequently you're getting a lot more homework. And this board packet was probably 25% more than usual. But the process I am following does make you do more work, and so I wanted to check in and make sure that that's agreeable. Commissioner Vila.
I do miss Regional Manager Prenslow's PowerPoint presentations on the Southeast region, though.
I'll put that as a regular item on the agenda then. Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I don't have a point of reference really to the way it used to be. I would also say if we can encourage vendors and others, external folks that are coming to present, if we have a significant document in our materials, I think we can get the executive summary and the briefer version so that we can actually focus on discussion during the meeting. So if there can be that request of anyone that comes in from outside, that would be probably helpful to our timeline as well.
Well, that'll be good. Staff will no longer be treated differently. So, Jeff, will seven slides on all our PowerPoints. Commissioner Taylor.
As a new commissioner, I appreciate the detail in the packets. I learned years ago that PowerPoint is not a Word doc, so I appreciate the brevity in the presentations.
Great. Okay, we'll proceed with that kind of format going forward. All right.
I would comment, John, to Commissioner Garcia, that item number 20, with 169 slides in the PowerPoint, quite a few, but they were very nice.
Okay. Very good then. Craig, we're ready for you then. I apologize for diverting things.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commission, Mr. Director. For the record, my name is Craig Workman, and I'm the Capital Program Manager for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I'd like to just introduce to you guys today the 2020 capital project list. And there is a little bit of a typo on the agenda. This is an informational item, so it's not an action item, just to clarify that, an action item. So let me talk about this a little bit. Press the right one here, okay. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the selection process, so how CPW goes about generating this list I'm talking to you guys today about. So this is a list of large cap projects, so what is a large cap project? A large cap project is typically a construction project, could be design or it could be construction or both under the same line. And it's a project which is $100,000 in value or over. So that's kind of CPW's definition of what a large cap project is. The selection process is kind of a ground up grassroots process we do every single year. It started usually in December with the regions and boots on the ground sections formulating what types of projects they are hoping for in their specific areas on properties, facilities, that type of thing. That process moves up the org structure with ultimately approval by Director Broscheid, and that usually happens about in May. So it's about a December to May kind of process. The actual entry of the project request, so they type up a big form with all the details about the project so we can kind of vet it, understand it before we get too far down the road. We digitize that process so that all that information now is entered on an online form, and it really makes our process much more efficient. We can take the information and share it. The form is available to anybody inside CPW, so a lot of times different CPW staff will collaborate together to build a project. Might have an engineer giving input, a facility manager giving input, a planner, somebody else, a specialist, all putting in, so we have a really complete profile of what the project is supposed to accomplish. So just want to mention that. After director's approval in May, Then the list is then shared with several other bodies, including the CDC, GOCO, and ultimately goes to the EDO at the end of the cycle. So I'm going to move on from the selection process to the actual list. So this is the list here. It's tiny. You cannot read it on this slide. I realize that, so a copy of this is in your packets if you guys want to reference it. And I'll go ahead and talk about it a little bit. The list for just for navigation is kind of color-coded. So the green projects are parks projects. The blue projects are wildlife projects. The total values for this list for this 2020 is parks total is 17 million total value, and the wildlife value is 3.5 million. So the grand total is roughly in the $20 million range for both sides combined. This capital funding is a 3-year opportunity or envelope of funds. And this list here, the funding will be available, I think we call it the 2020 list. So the funding will be available July 1, 2020. So we're talking, no, that's a boo-boo, I think. Yeah, 2020, that's right, sorry. 2020, and then we get 3 years of that. So that's how long the money is good for. I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Assistant Director Margaret Taylor asked me to share some of this information with you. She was with the Financial Committee, the PwC Financial Committee, and she shared a list that I gave her, which was kind of a way to track the status of the capital projects across the board, across the state. So I had drummed up a spreadsheet at that time. I think if you guys are on the Financial Committee, remember probably seeing it, probably went through it in some level of detail. I went back and wanted to really improve on that and build a tracking tool that allows us to really get a really good grip on what's happening across the state. We have a lot of things in play. When, with 3 years of projects, especially on the large cap, that's over about 100 projects that are active at any state. Could be very beginning stage of design, investigation, or finishing up a construction project. So there's a lot of moving parts. So the just a snapshot understanding of what's going on allows us to really key in on issues. This slide, large cap through different coded just to understand it quickly. So if it's green, dark green means it's under construction, which is the last phase of these projects. So that's a good thing. So really we want everything to ultimately go to green and go to the bottom. The lighter green, the leftmost bar on that top left, there's a few laggers up there. We have some extensions on a few projects where we run into idiosyncrasies, usually with permitting. It's been kind of the problem du jour, where we're going to many times either Bureau of Reclamation on some of our parks that Bureau controls, or we're working with on some sanitary sewer systems with the Department of Health. And some of those reviews have just really gone off the charts long, like 8 months to a year and a half on some of these reviews. And when you only have 3 years to design and build something, and some of these parks are at high elevation, you can only get in limited opportunities. You want to wait till the park shuts down, so you have a narrow envelope, for example. Maybe you're at 11 Mile and you want to get in there after the fall, after the summer, so you're trying to get in there September-ish, and then all of a sudden the snow comes in November. If you miss that small envelope, sometimes you have to wait a whole nother season to get in there. So one blink, sometimes with a lengthy review, can push us over the edge and we have to ask for extension. Good news is all these projects on the top left, they're primed, they're ready to go. We vet them, we'll get them done, but we do have a couple glitches there, so I want to mention that.
How many of those are because of contractor problems? Is that a big factor, or is it mostly the permitting?
You know, generally no. We have had a couple projects that aren't that far along into the 4th year that we've had. It's been a very, very competitive market on the construction side lately. When we're having trouble just having vendors show up and give us bids. In the last 3 or 4 months, we've had multiple occasions where we only received like a single bid. For bigger projects, we go the distance. We advertise, we personally call contractors, even the local area, because sometimes when you're in remote areas, there's just not a lot of awareness, or people are working in ski areas, they're busy. their heads are down, they've got plenty of work, and they don't even see us on their radar as a possible project. So a lot of times we're making phone calls to help build interest, and even then, we just opened some jobs in Durango, and we had 2 or 3 companies show, but only 1 responsive bidder, 2 times in a row. So that's kind of been the biggest challenge, really, as of late. It's just, and then, of course, when there's low competition, they understand they can pretty much elevate their pricing structure. So then we deal with, okay, now we've got one price, but it's higher than we like. Then we either have to make a decision on whether we want to rebid it, try our luck again, push out the project, or go into some sort of competitive negotiation with the individual responsive bidder and see if we can value engineer it, look somewhere together to collectively bring the cost down so we can get it done.
Commissioner Vigil.
Craig, do these projects include dam projects? Because I didn't see
Yeah,
it.
that's a great question. In fact, on this slide here, the bottom left, where you see the dark blue and the green, that is a split out. That's the same projects above in the more red-green chart. The bottom left is the same projects by dollar value this time, and the blue are the typical large cap projects, which are buildings, infrastructure of some sort usually. The green on those bars are what CPW is committing to dams. So you can see, starting in 16-17, CPW has made a really significant contribution or commitment to getting our dams up in good repair. And those are the 3 big projects there. Essentially, are Beaver Park is the 16-17, I believe, and then 17-18, 18-19 are Sylvan Lake, and then Michigan Creek is a lake, is a reservoir over by State Forest State Park, which we're gonna, it's our next one we're gonna tackle. So, does that help? So yes,
Yeah.
they are included in this list.
Follow up, a few years ago, we had a dam risk presentation.
Yes.
Which was scary. So are you doing those high-risk projects first?
Absolutely. So we're going down that list one at a time and going from the ones that were identified and profiled as having the most risk and knocking those off sequentially. And we're about a third of the way through that list. We've actually completed those projects, and now we have another third in the pipeline, and then we'll keep on cranking them out and get them done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Commissioner Hauser. Oh, Commissioner Garcia.
So I may have answered my question. Dams is a 4-letter word to trout. And so I was just curious, this is all maintenance? We're not building more dams, or are we?
Correct. No, this is rehabilitation, essentially. So it's...
Mr. Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And then maybe a follow-up to that question, are there any contemplated for removal? At
Not
any
to
point,
my-
at
no,
any
not to
point
my
in the
understanding.
future,
That's-
obsolete or otherwise?
Not to my understanding, no. I haven't heard of any that were contemplated for removal, to answer your question.
We could do that.
Monkey wrench gang? Teasing.
And then I'll just finish out this real quick. The pie chart there is more just kind of a representation of like how much work really is in the pipeline, and the one on the bottom right just kind of represents the total workload by capital staff, and that includes folks in the region. So that's folks who are driving around doing project management. They're in the pickup truck, they're working with the contractor, plus the folks who are doing the design portion, sometimes in the Denver office. And this includes small cap. So small cap is our other sector of capital. It's for the more routine, smaller maintenance projects like replacing a roof or upgrading maybe an HVAC system or refinishing a section of road or doing a boat ramp, something like that, something that's on the smaller side, maybe replacing a vault toilet somewhere on SWA. So that includes large cap and small cap, that pie chart, and that sums up the total amount of projects and value for 3 running years that is assigned to the 30 or so capital staff around the region. So that total is 587 projects, plus or minus, and that's a $74 million value. So just shows you there is a lot of stuff happening all across the state. And this is border to border.
Commissioner Zimmerman.
Thank you. I know a few years ago we put a hold on all large cap projects. That was, I think, Regional Manager Ken Brink gave us that presentation, and I don't know, that was a handful of years ago. Yep. These are, it looks like 2015 projects, and of course, you said it's a 3-year cycle, so I'm assuming, just looking for clarification, are we approving 2015 project spend for 2019, or just trying to get the timing and the years right? And are we going back?
The list in front of us is not on this is not on this chart yet. So the list I'm presenting is the one on deck, I guess you would call it that, right?
Okay, I'm looking at the spreadsheet that is in our packet.
Right, this one right here?
Yeah.
Yep.
And
so this is the youngest list. Nothing has happened on this as of yet.
And these are 2015 projects.
These are 20.
Up on the top right, it says 2015 existing parks infrastructure value.
Oh, okay. I see what your question is. So the very top part of this chart here, which you're referring to, the way CPW goes about kind of earmarking a pot of money. So let's just say we have a pot of money that's $20 million, and kind of earmarking where some of the funds ought to be spent in a certain sector of the state. We have 4 geographic regions, and then we have principally the other large consumer of capital projects is the Wildlife and Natural Resources branch, which generally is hatchery type work. So the way CPW has been going about kind of divvying up the biggest pot of money into smaller pots of money, and then each of those regions or the hatchery group has a smaller pot of money to actually pick their projects and utilize that funding, is broken out by the percentage of infrastructure across the state. So in layman's terms, if you go into a region per se, Northwest region, we count up all the parks, count up all the properties, all the infrastructure, and put a value to that. And then we do it all across the 4 quadrants, and then we, on the other end, on the 5th quadrant, would be all the hatchery system, the 18+ hatcheries across the state. Try to put a value on that. So how many hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure do we have spread across the state? And then a fraction of that would go to each of the 5 kind of pots, if you want to call it that. So if the total amount was 500 million and there was 100 million in one region, they would get 20% of the total amount of capital funding for a given year to build projects in that specific area. So that's what this is about. It's about the breakout of the initial total capital amount to be spent per year. And that 2015 was the year we did the last assessment.
Okay.
So that's the 2015 count. It's like a census, I guess, if you want to kind of relate it. So we took kind of a census around all the infrastructure in the state at 2015, and then things happen very slowly. I mean, you'd have to have a
no, that's fair.
Long term to really start that percentage to start to change.
Thank you.
Does that help? You bet.
Commissioner Garcia.
I believe Mr. Vigil was first.
I like to switch sides.
I'm just curious on that same chart, infrastructure value, and you said we place a value. Is that something other than cost, or is it cost?
It's replacement costs.
Replacement.
So if you, per se, had a 3,000 square foot shop building, we would just say that current replacement value is approximately $150 a foot, and that would give us the current value.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Or pipeline or boat ramp or whatever it might be.
No, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't. There was a reason you put value instead of cost. Got it.
Commissioner Vigil.
Craig, we made some commitments to the legislature. One of them was reduce a backlog of dam maintenance, and you've addressed that. The other was modernization of our hatcheries.
Yes.
How are you going to go about doing that?
Okay, just checking.
I mean, because we don't have any new hatcheries; they're all old.
Right. So the kind of the plan we have in place is as follows. Since we haven't in recent years taken kind of a broad brush look at all the facilities and how they are contributing to the overall hatchery output, and a lot of things have changed since the last time we took and did kind of a step back and take a glance at them. We've had diseases to deal with, such as Roy disease. Our focuses have changed slightly on different species that we're putting in waters. So the first phase of answering your question is to do an overall study on what the capacity and production opportunities are at each of the units, and then compare them to the profile of what we want as an agency to commit in terms of stocking fish in various waters and of different types. So then determine where we are, determine where the gaps are, and kind of identify where the biggest opportunity is to go in and renovate or even maybe clear and restart and build a fresh new hatchery. So the first is a planning effort, then to identify which, because I think in the Act it talks about modernization of a single hatchery, and that's the ultimate goal we're moving towards according to the wording in the bill. So, like I said, the first effort is to identify and plan, and even take a step back and say, well, we stock X many fish a year. Is that the right number? Even a step behind the step. Are we stocking the amount of fish? Is that the number we're doing right now? Is that the right number? Even looking at that, then looking at the hatchery system all the way across, identifying the one that would be the best opportunity, and then going forward and focusing on one unit and doing the work there.
I think that's a great way to look at it. I'm glad you're looking at it that way and not just say, yeah, let's just put some new stuff in a hatchery. I think we need to look at it. There may be some hatcheries that really will never be efficient, and possibly we have to maybe shut them down and instead of trying to repair it, build a new one somewhere. I hope we're looking at it that way. Because we've done some hatchery tours, and some of them are pretty old. I mean, they're older than me.
They are.
That tells you that.
The average age is like constructed around 1960, so all of them are pushing 50 plus years old, and some are much older than. Some are turn of the century, the
Right.
very beginnings of them. So you're right on that. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Greg, I'm losing control of my time, so.
Okay, no, I get it.
Great presentation. It's very thought-provoking, but maybe if you could kind of wrap up for us.
Yep. I had one final quick slide, and I'll hit that one real quick. This is just using the same tool that I was talking about to generate these dashboards. This is just an example of focusing in on a specific sector of the work we do. This chart here shows only GOCO-related projects, so we have to report. We appreciate the opportunity to report to GOCO, and we do it at least on an annual basis, sometimes more frequent than that. So it's just a demonstration here showing, hey, this is such a versatile tool, we can dive in and look at any sector of the work that we're doing. So that's all I had. Just have more questions.
Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Mr. Delacca.
Morning, Chairman, Commissioners, Director. I'm Nick Delacca, the State Trails Program Manager, and this should be the act for the Carl the Beautiful. Just real quick, this grant cycle stemmed from some additional GOCO funding that was reallocated for it, and also from the same initiative as Co-Trucks came from with Colorado the Beautiful and the current governor's initiative. That initiative is being, one of the key parts to provide on-the-ground connections and also planning grants for it to construction, but then also looking at some of the Colorado the Beautiful aspects too of public health, providing opportunities to underserved communities, and a lot of the other ones are kind of our normal ones of wildlife, natural resource mitigation, but then also that connectivity and larger regional scale connections for communities and visitors. So we ended up having 12 construction grants submitted and 2 planning grants for a total of 14 grants, and that came to a total request of about $5,260,000. Within that, we had a quality projects, a variety from the large scale connections all the way down to local connections of and even some just trail systems within the parks and kind of those economically challenged communities too. So it was a good variety of with the planning grants, the trails well, I guess for the recommended funding, the Trails Committee took into consideration, we committed to running 2 cycles for this. And so looking at the reviewer scores and the grants and based on quality projects, and also having money to shift on forward to our next grant cycle 2, the Trails Committee recommends funding 1 of the planning grants for a total of almost $100,000. And then 10 of the construction grants for a total of about $4.5 million along those lines. And so that leaves us with a total of 11 out of the 14 grants that are recommended for funding from the State Recreational Trails Committee. And that's a total of $4.6 million approximately. And with that, I will turn it over to the chairman.
Very good. Comments or questions on Colorado the Beautiful? Mr. Zimmerman.
Thanks, Nick. I think it was key that you pointed out on the slide. On the slide, the construction grants also include long-term operation maintenance, trail and environmental stewardship. I'm curious, of the construction grants that were submitted, were any of them for O&M and stewardship, environmental stewardship, that kind of thing?
Yeah, and that's really a requirement that we have. The operation and maintenance we've really shifted to in our regular grant cycle too, and really future grant cycles will all be that way. But they pretty much have to have an operation and maintenance plan. I guess I'm not the one saying the funding, but it's a key point of our questions and has a high score associated with it. And so if they don't have an operation and maintenance plan when they come in the application, they're definitely questioned on it for their presentations. And like I said, it's a key part for receiving funding from us. And along with those, usually, it depends on the organization. If it's a municipality, it may just be in their annual budget, things like that. But a lot of times we see within the operation maintenance plan that stewardship aspect too of, okay, we're going to collaborate with sometimes local schools, sometimes it's local nonprofits too.
Other comments or questions? Commissioner Vigil.
I think you might, for the benefit of the new commissioners, explain how the process is looked at to make sure that there are no major disturbances to wildlife.
Sure. I did have that in normal. I took it out for slide numbers, but
that's okay. Now you can talk to
That's
it.
right. Yeah. So I'll talk kind of about 2 points, just the general process, and then I'll get into the wildlife review process. So the general process is we put out the applications. We have kind of a 4-stage process, and public comment can come in for all 4 of those stages. But the applications go out to the grant reviewers, and they review the grants, and we have public meetings on those grants. That's where public comment can come into there too. And from there, the grant reviewers develop individual scores, and from there we average all those scores and come out with the list, like this list is, of where the scores come out. And then from there, we look at, this one's a little bit easier because it's mainly GOCO funding with one land and water conservation fund. But like for our regular non-motorized, we have a mix of funding. So on our side, we look at how we can balance out with all the stipulations to those fundings. And with that, we make a recommendation to the Trails Committee. From there, the Trails Committee makes a recommendation here to the Parks and Wildlife Commission, and that's for the final approval. For our wildlife evaluation, all of the grants that come in, we've actually bumped up the process this year and for the Colorado Beautiful grant cycle, where we require the applicants to contact our area wildlife managers 1 month prior to the application deadline with a basic scope and basic scope and map. And so with that, kind of our goal is to not only have us doing the wildlife review, but get the conversation started, get our staff talking with the applicants and the people designing and planning the projects. So to kind of open up that communication a little bit earlier. And with those applications that come in, all of them are reviewed by our wildlife staff, and each region submits a memo of any concerns that they may have. If there are concerns, we may try to see if they can be worked out before the applications go to final scoring. If they can't, we usually try to pull them aside. With it this year, so we've went different ways in the past. I guess it's up, the Trails Committee can decide to just pull them out if they like. We've really shifted, especially in this newer grant cycles, to having more emphasis or more wildlife questions that have more points associated with them in the application. So if there are significant wildlife concerns, they're going to most likely score lower, and at the lower end, most likely not receive funding. And so that's how we've been handling it since we've incorporated those questions in the criteria, that leaving them in lately. And I would say for the past, at least since I've been on it, and probably a couple years prior to that too, in this position, we haven't had any come forward that have had any significant wildlife concerns with our review process and how we've been handling it.
Thank you, Nick.
Any other comments or questions, Commissioners?
I'm just curious, based on Mr. Vihill's comments, we are never provided with any sort of listing of people who have applied that don't end up in your recommendation. Is that correct?
So the two at the bottom, like on this slide here, they're not recommended for funding.
Okay, and so that's all of the requests then?
This is all of the construction requests here, yep. And then the other slide is the planning request. So out of the two planning, one is recommended for funding, the other one down there is not.
Okay, so we do see them all?
Yep, and they're all in your packet. Has all of the applications that came in a basic description, project description.
Just for the record, that was Commissioner Garcia's question. So, Commissioner Zimmer.
And another follow-up. The way that, and Nick, you're going to have to, or Margaret, might have to help me out here, but the way that we have, for the way that the State Trails Committee funds projects, I think we have motorized, non-motorized, and is Colorado the Beautiful part of non-motorized, or is that a separate group?
It's a separate.
So we have three.
Yeah, and it's just
rounds of applications for trail work.
Sorry for interrupting. Yeah, so it's a special cycle, and so we're planning to run 2 years of it for it.
So that might explain why we don't have 100 applications, because I think applicants are starting to become savvy with which. Is that an accurate presumption there? Okay.
Yeah, and just note, we did have a lower amount of applicants for a regular non-motorized cycle this year too, and I think part of it's because this one was right before it. So if you're kind of putting them together, we're getting closer to our normal amount of applicants. Mm-hmm. And then we also do have a snowmobile grant program too.
Any other comments or questions?
Chair.
Oh, Director, I apologize.
Thank you, Chair. And to tag on to Commissioner Vihill's comment about where the wildlife and the recreation has been, we're going a much larger approach to work with counties in particular that instead of this becoming a project like Nick said is a month out and then here's a proposal and then we pull the wildlife folks in and we try to mitigate that we're looking at taking either county-wide, municipality-wide approach that Chaffee County is a good example that went through a significant planning process that looked at recreation, wildlife habitat, open space, parks, and they really looked and put together basically a strategic type of a plan. This is where we want to develop, this is where we don't. And we're really encouraging municipalities to start thinking like that. And if there's an incentive, it's maybe a much different or larger planning grant that allows them to decide what they want to be. Then when they submit applications and trails, we've already worked a lot of that out. Or it's minor, it doesn't become so contentious. We've had some meetings with some of the counties and they really like that approach. They've embarked on that approach. And I think to roll that out statewide, now I think we're going to get to a point of a lot of these issues can get ironed out ahead of time versus, okay, an application comes in and then everybody goes to their specific corners. And so if you go back and can talk to your counties and county planners and things like that we would really like to see that. I think it would be a real benefit to all of us, really. So there's a few that are taking that on. We've had a recent meeting with Pitkin County, Jefferson County, and others, and they really saw this as the way forward. And So we're really encouraging that. And I think it's going to come down to their availability of resources, and I've committed to them. We'll be at that table, and we are. So,
Commissioner Vigil.
That's a really good point, because the city of Trinidad has a Parks and Rec advisory board. Well, I was asked by one of the members of that board to come and speak to the whole board, because they built their own trail on city property, but it became sideways with our local GWM, because they went through an area that they shouldn't have. I don't remember if it was a deer calving area or something, or a winter area. So I went and talked to him, and I gave him Nick's name and also the Southeast trail person, and told him, hey, if you're going to build a trail, contact our local DWM or the area wildlife manager and talk to the grant folks, because why build them on your own if you can get some grant funding, and especially planning grants. So I don't know if they listen to me, because I don't live in the city of Trinidad, but I think they did. I think they got the message that, yeah, because they could start going wild. They have some volunteers that want to just start building trails everywhere down there. So a caution for the future. Watch out for Trinidad.
In those counties that are embarking on that are spending significant amount of their own resources to evaluate wildlife and collaring and others, and it's, we have that information. I think it's just a matter of the proper timing, that you can sit down and strategically plan across a landscape versus trail by trail or use by use and those kind of things. And I think where we're seeing human growth and demand for those trails really running into some habitat issues and wildlife issues is where we're starting to see those starting to crop up. Maybe some more of the more rural counties aren't seeing that just yet, but it's coming, and it's better to get ahead of it, I think.
If I may just add to that, Mr. Broche brought up the Chaffee County, and that is one we're funding. That was a big goal for us with the planning grants here, is to everything Bob spoke to, is to give funding to promote that sustainable and large holistic planning that we feel is beneficial for the state. And then also just want to note, for any of the other planning grants that we give out, we do require that they work with our CPW staff during that planning process, and we've really seen a benefit in that. For now, when they're coming to us for construction, a lot of the issues are already worked out and whatnot.
Oh, Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you. I would just like to say that this is, to me, one of the more exciting parts of our agenda. This is making communities' dreams come true. These, years of planning and work, and for all of these projects as proposed to be funded, of the ones that are proposed for funding, to be funded in total, with one being funded more than the requested amount. That's incredible. And yeah, so thank you for presenting this.
This is an action item, right, Nick?
Yes, sir.
So we would need a motion to approve the Colorado the Beautiful grant funding.
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Vigil.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Hauser. Any public comment? I don't think we have anything here. Okay. Very good. We'll do this by voice vote as well.
You figured it out?
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion unanimously passed. Thank you, Nick. Nick, can I just tell you, the pleasures of sitting around this U is to see folks grow, and I think your president come a tremendous way. I really appreciate it.
It's definitely not one of my favorite things to do, but try.
Thanks very much. Mr. McLaughlin.
I wonder if that's why.
Commissioner, since I'm kind of a point person and talking about the same things we've already talked about, that we kind of focus a little bit on this refuge problem we got, particularly on the Front Range. And So that's kind of what I asked staff to talk about in our second discussion on these two plans. So I hope that meets with Craig's expectations.
Okay.
It does now.
Yes, it does.
Thank you. Of these plans that you're going to see the next several minutes of the agenda. And just talk about herd management planning very quickly, and that is that we manage by objective in the state. We manage, our managed by objective is a term you'll hear, and the way it works is we manage for individual herds on a local level. We talk to the public and attempt to get a balance between what the public's interests are for managing those herds and what perhaps the habitat can sustain, the interplay between the biology of the animals and social aspects of managing. So with that, we have a two-step process of approval, and these next two are up for action for your approval. And I will speak very briefly about both of them. The first one is the big Thompson deer herd. It's in the northern Front Range. The map on your screen shows that it is about 1,200 square miles, and it has parts of Larimer and Boulder counties. And one of the big issues that we want to talk about here is that about a quarter of the area is taken up by the Rocky Mountain National Park, and there's also another significant portion of it that is in private ownership, and 8% is in local government. Now, with the national park and with some of the local government open spaces, there are places, obviously, where we do not hunt our deer. So the deer herd has large refuges, both in the park and in some of these open space areas. And that has been a challenge for our management. Very quickly, the population estimates over time have vacillated, but they've been, as you'll note on the graph here, the blue line shows the population estimates over time for the last 30 years, this herd, and the red lines are the objectives. That's the level we'd like to be managing at. We've obviously been over that objective for nearly all of the last 30-year period. And again, I want to come back to the issue of refuges and the challenge that makes for our managers. Since 2002, we've been attempting to manage the CWD prevalence in the population. You'll notice a marked reduction at that time, although it did not ever drop the whole way down to the objective. There was an effort to reduce the overall population numbers and density. And at that time, hunter satisfaction declined, as you might expect, given the fact that hunters are only able to hunt portions of the area that are public land outside the national park, outside some of these areas that are controlled by local municipalities. So we have not only do we have an issue with managing the overall population of deer in terms of numbers, but also distribution, and where the hunters can and cannot get at the deer to manage, to harvest them and manage the population size. This is a population that is relatively productive. We have recently looking at 62 fawns per 100 does, where statewide average production in our deer populations is 56 per 100. So I'm going to spend just a second on this slide, which is the important issues and opportunities we see here. Again, land management is an issue. We need to continue to work with these our other land management agencies, such as the Park Service, but also I'm emphasizing some of the local government entities. And I wanted to pause here and say that this is a challenge, but it's not something that we haven't been doing across the Front Range. There are several places where we have been working on smaller scales with smaller parcels of land successfully with some of these local governments. But we need to continue to work on that. And I believe the chairman would like to see a conversation along that line,
continue with the agency and with our other land management agencies in both this unit and others throughout the Front Range. So to get at these management issues, the land management, deer distribution, and to address chronic wasting disease, we've taken several actions. We're looking at longer private land only seasons to address issues with deer distribution, because we have not only in the parks, but we have areas where we have to emphasize getting harvest on private lands. And we do continue to have this history of managing for reduced buck-doe ratios to address chronic wasting disease. We're at 12% right now, chronic wasting disease in this particular unit. And we have a 10%, the plan actually calls for a 10% trigger point, and to continue to manage at the lower end of the buck-doe ratios in those units to address and keep a cap on prevalence of chronic wasting disease. We heard from the public that they want us to continue to manage for a robust deer population. Everybody likes deer and wants to have deer around, but at the same time, they want to have us manage for controlling chronic wasting disease. As a result, we've come to an objective in which we are looking at managing for a herd of 8,000 to 10,000 animals. And our alternative for sex ratio is to maintain sex ratio at 25 to 30 bucks per 100 does. For your reference and reminder, right now we're at 25 bucks per 100 does. So that's the lower end of the proposed sex ratio for this particular herd. And we will continue to work. Our plan is to continue to work through the statewide response plan, incorporating the adaptive approach in that plan going forward with this particular herd. So our strategies are to work on the fourth seasons, adding harvest in the fourth season, which emphasizes adult buck harvest, adjusting our doe harvest to allow us to put a lid on the population size, and continue again to emphasize our collaboration with land management agencies. Just a reminder about the CWD prevalence. Figured that may be a question from the commission. So what it's been, it has fluctuated a bit, but remained relatively stable. We've had a period here in the last 5 or 10 years of reduced sampling, so we don't have as much confidence in those particular estimates, but by and large the estimate has been bouncing right around the 10 to 12% range. With that, I'll take questions on this one, or perhaps the chairman would like me to move to this next one, which is very similar.
I think this is an action item, as I recall, right?
Yes, it is.
So why don't we take any comments or questions? Commissioner Bray.
Yeah, Craig, you alluded to it. I just want a little clarification on the chronic wasting disease plan that we heard yesterday suggested management action at a 5% rate, and here your 10% is a trigger. Can you just comment on why that is? Is this particularly different? I know both these plans and both these herds have had a long history of chronic wasting diseases. I think it was the first place it was ever found in Colorado.
Very, very good question, and very astute in picking that up. There's a difference there, and that this plan was written prior to the statewide plan being drafted, for one thing. And we have the opportunity to adapt this plan under the CWD plan. Right now, and what we've done in the last several years is we are trying to drive that CWD prevalence down. we have not, I would take it that most people would argue we have not driven it down, but we have not allowed it to increase, and we'll continue to work on that. My sense is that we can certainly, we will certainly have the local managers will make the decisions about buck-doe ratios and managing for the lower level of that buck-doe ratio through time. So there's a disconnect, a slight disconnect there between the 10 and the 5%. But going forward, I see us continuing to try to drive that prevalence down.
Thank you.
Commissioner McDaniel.
Maybe follow up on that same question you just asked Commissioner Bray. I just want to make sure I understood. I think I do anyway. What you just answered, Greg, it was that although the prevalence target would be different between 5 to 10%, the approval that's in the response plan has a target of 25 to 30 bucks per dose. So does this plan. So if this plan's approved, which I'm assuming it will be, at 25 to 30, it doesn't really make a difference about the prevalence because you'll be managing to the lower, probably to the lower end of that buck dose.
Still be managing for that 25 level.
So I think that's the confusion for me too, was the difference between 5 and 10, but then the buck-doe ratio won't matter if they're managing to the 25 to 30 level. Right?
Yeah, and as we go through time, gain more experience, and return to the next iteration of this plan, we probably will see a difference in that.
But you'd be adjusting per this plan the doe harvest to actually move the population upward.
We use the doe harvest for that, yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Garcia.
Greg, I'm new at this, so you can help me here. And if it's a long answer, you could take me outside during the break. But just walk me through objective versus modeled versus your alternative. So you've got an objective of less than 5, modeled of 7,800, and then an alternative of 8 to 10.
Okay. That was you see current status, it's post-hunt. That's the plan as it exists today, before your approval of any plan going forward. So for the last several years, going the whole way back to 2002, we've been, our objective has been to try to cap that population at around 5,000 deer. The modeled estimate is what, from our annual modeling of the population trajectory, most recent has been at 7,800. So we have been over. And again, going back to the graph that shows over time the population trajectory, it also shows that we are above where we ideally would like to be with that population. And to the chairman's earlier comments and mine earlier, the challenge we have in this particular herd is there are large portions of the area that we have limited access to.
I understand. Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Vigil.
This is a question for the director. Do the feds care about chronic wasting disease? I mean, are they trying to do something to help the deer herd out? I know there's restrictions on national parks, but my goodness, you can't have all the deer dying. They wouldn't like that.
Well, yeah, the federal land management agencies are absolutely engaged in chronic wasting disease, much like sand dunes and national parks. I mean, they're limited in basically the management and the hunting of those species. So it's a quandary. They typically rely on culling, but I know we're doing a lot of work with National Park Service on just sampling size. They just have one arm tied behind their back as far as when it comes to management. So,
but they're not getting to the point where they're harassing the herd so they run onto state land.
I don't think so. I would hope not.
That's a joke.
Commissioner Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. Is it true that that each state is pretty much left to their own devices to manage their own populations? That each, in other words, Wisconsin was referenced yesterday, as was Wyoming, has a 50% CWD rate, it sounds like. So each state has its ability to manage to their own strategy?
They do. What we've been trying to do, particularly here in the West, well, even nationwide, is that we have states like Colorado who's been way ahead. Other states are just becoming positive, and so we're trying to come up with best management practices, and we have through our regional and national association about what is the current state of the science, what are management techniques that other states have employed that are showing promise, what are areas that don't. But every state has its different politics, different authorities, for example. But we're trying to really standardize, once somebody becomes positive, now what do you do? There's interstate commerce related to captive cervids that are moving all over the place. So every state is different in their, I would say, sort of in their politics or in their communities and publics and commercial industries. But as far as what those management techniques are, we're trying to get to what are the BMPs out there, and then every state can pick and choose what they'll do or won't do. And so it's really left kind of a sort of a haphazard approach to how we're going to control deer, particularly moving, like an example is moving deer from one state to another has basically been eliminated for the most part. But I'll tell you with Colorado, I think Texas came online, Arkansas, a couple of those states became positive, and our folks went down and talked to their commissions, the bodies like this, and said, here's how we've approached it. And for the most part, they've adopted it. But everybody kind of reinvents the wheel every time there's a new case that comes out. And so I think with the BMPs, I think it's going to make a big, more of a standardized approach to this and prevent this reinvention of the wheel over and over again.
Commissioner Taylor, I would also comment too that at WAFL you see that interaction amongst the states coming together, and Dr. Miller, right, our veterinarian or chief veterinarian, presented last year at WAFL's midwinter meeting, and there's a lot of interest. So that's to a certain extent how the states are coordinating, I think, and how you see it. Any other comment? Oh,
Chairman, I think to get to Commissioner Taylor's comment about Wisconsin is you think about states like that, when that came online, there was a different level of thinking, and Matt did a good job at explaining we're managing it. At that time, it was thought we could eradicate it, and that we all know that has changed. And so as the science continues to evolve, people's views on this are getting different. But yeah, those are, I think a lot of states learned lessons after that state of what not to do. But they were basing their commission, their agency was basing the decision on what they thought was the best thing at the time. Now we're a lot smarter, and I think that's why it's continuing to push the envelope of what science is and what management and what those results are doing. And then to be able to share that with other states, it's going to make us all better. Dr. Miller's gone to Europe and talked to those folks about what CWD is, because it is over there as well. So.
And Commissioner Taylor, our own website and other, there's other materials that we can help you find to help build your background in this disease. It's both myself or Matt would be more than willing to help you out there.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Commissioners, this is an action item, so Commissioner Vigil.
I would make a motion we approve this herd management plan, even though you have kind of handcuffs on you and how you handle it in this game management unit. But it's a good plan.
So you have a motion on the table to approve the Big Thompson Deer Herd Management Plan.
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Bray. Any public comment? You're training me, Council. I don't have any blue slips. I don't see anything in the audience. So we'll do this by voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Craig, you want to go on to the Red Feather Pooter Canyon Deer Management Plan?
Absolutely. The next plan is for the Red Feather Pooter Canyon herd, which is a herd that's immediately north of the Thompson herd, and it's up right against the Wyoming line. This herd does not have the park issue, but it does have a lot of federal land. 46% is by Fish and Wildlife Service. The herd's trajectory has been up and down over the last 30 years or so. The reduction in numbers was done again to control CWD. The dotted line on your graph here is the objective range for the population. So we dipped actually below that range 10 or so years ago, and we're up over the range at this point in time. This is a range, a herd that is not as productive as the one just south of it. The fawn to doe ratio is at 50, which is slightly below our statewide average. The issues and opportunities we see for this herd are similar. We have 3: chronic wasting disease, habitat, and local landowners and hunters' interest in deer management. We've been managing for chronic wasting disease. Prevalence in 2003 was around 12%. By this last year, we've dropped that down to around 5%. We've had a bit more success in reducing chronic wasting disease prevalence in this herd. We've done that by, again, reducing densities, and there 10 years or so ago, and then by looking at maintaining a moderate proportion of mature bucks. The habitat issue is really based on human development as much of the Front Range, the human development in the wintering range along the Highway 287 corridor, and also changes due to wildfires, which actually have improved the capacity of that area to hold deer, to carry deer. Public input that we've received with the planning process were the public wanted to continue to maintain a large, robust deer herd, but they're also in favor of maintaining low prevalence of chronic wasting disease. So as we look at the alternatives for managing both population size and herd composition, what's selected for this particular herd is an alternative of 13,000 to 15,000 deer, which is above the old objective, but very close to where we're at right now with the number of deer on the landscape, and to maintain again a 25 to 30 bucks per 100 does buck doe ratio. Again, we're at 25 per 100 there right now. So our implementation strategies will deal with adjusting our doe harvest to adjust population size, and to increase our buck harvest slightly, and then adjust it as needed to maintain that population within the buck doe ratio is what we're looking at, that we have as our objective. That's all I have on that particular herd plan, Mr. Chairman.
Craig, is the refuge problem then not as big an issue here?
It's not as big as an issue, but there is still some issue. But it's not as dramatic as that one just to the south.
On refuges, I'm aware, just being in Boulder and seeing all the work that's been done to open up Rabbit Mountain because of elk. And I had a chance to obviously to watch all the public outreach that you guys did on that. It's a huge amount of work. I guess you have to repeat that all across the Front Range for these herds. That's the only way really to deal with these refuges, individually, one by one?
I believe so, because we have individual entities that you're dealing with. However, I think maybe we put our minds to trying to strategize a process that would help communicate with with these entities. I think we have a messaging issue here that we need to address, a messaging that we need your help in managing this herd for the benefit of, of your constituents as well as ours.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I'm sure any commissioner would be happy to help if we can. I know how much work it was, but on the other side, if we can get the county commission in Boulder to recognize these issues, I feel like we should be able to get almost any other political subdivision to be able to look at it too. So, A, I appreciate it, and two, I would like you to, especially on those front range refuges, if there's anything we can do as commissioners, please ask, because we'd like to.
Okay, we will. Thank you.
Thanks. Commissioners, any other comments or questions? So this is another action item. So we need a motion.
Make a motion, we approve this.
Second.
That means we've just had a motion from Commissioner Vigil to approve the Red Feather Pooter Canyon Deer Herd Management Plan, seconded by Commissioner McDaniel. Any public comment? Any further discussion? Let's do this by voice vote as well. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Craig, thank you.
Thank you.
Motion passes unanimously, Laura. Next up is Mr. Dreyer with the draft mountain lion plan.
Thank you, Chairman Howard. Good morning, Commissioners, Director Broshide. My name is Brian Dreyer, and I'm the Senior Wildlife Biologist for the Southeast Region. Today I'll be presenting a draft mountain lion management plan for DAU L19, which is located in south central Colorado, includes GMUs 83, 85, 140, and 851. It's roughly bounded on the west side by the San Luis Valley, on the north side by Highway 69, kind of La Vita Pass, on the east by I-25 and Highway 160 on the Eastern Plains, and on the south by the Colorado-New Mexico border. The area represents, as you can imagine, diverse habitat with the high mountains of the Calibra mountain range and more arid plant communities in both the San Luis Valley and in the eastern plains of GMU 140. The DAU is 3,321 square miles, and 90% of the DAU is privately owned. It contains portions of Los Animas, Huerfano, and Castilla counties. So why are we looking to try and revise this plan? Well, first off, the original plan that's in place right now was done in 2004, so we've exceeded the 10-year planning window that we'd like to keep with our management plans. But in addition to that, over the last many years, we've heard from both the public and staff that the lion population in L19 has been on the rise. The observation is not consistent with our current management plan, where we've kind of met and surpassed the thresholds that are prescribed in that plan for stable management. So we set out to kind of try and better understand what might be happening. First, we did hold a public meeting in Trinidad on September 5th, and we had 27 members of the public attend. And they represented hunters, outfitters, and just general members of the public. And comments supported the general perception that lion population was on the rise and human conflicts were as well within this area. So then we took that information, and that was very much supported by our local staff. So we tried to better understand what might be causing that difference between the existing plan that we have and what they might be observing. Initially, we took a more sophisticated approach to model the lion abundance in L19, and that effort showed that there could be as many as 45 to 94 more lions than what we put in the 2004 plan. And in addition to that, we looked at gender and age of harvested cats from 2009 to 2016. And essentially that effort showed us that our current harvest may not be limiting this population. So all this to say that the plan needed to be revised, and that's the process we're going through right now. So I'm going to move on to kind of some of the historic harvest management, management for L19. So like I said, it was completed in 2004. It called for a stable management prescription. In the original 2004 plan, what we did was we first tried to identify the amount of available lion habitat within L19. We then took estimates of densities that were gathered on other studies that were found in the literature, and we projected a lion abundance to that area. We then, through other scientific studies, there are studies that suggest what proportion of that population can be removed for stable management. We did that, and then that sets a fixed threshold for harvest management. So the harvest management threshold was fixed for the life of the plan. So what you can see here in L19 is that from 2007 to 2013, we see this upward trend in our harvest. But then as we hit 2014, we start to meet those harvest limits that are met in the plan, and that persists all the way through 2017, where this last year, the harvest limit in GMUs 85, 851, and 140 were achieved in only 11 days of the season being opened. So we understand, our current plans have served us well, but harvest and lion populations are dynamic. But current management plans are static and with limited feedback mechanisms to inform management decisions based on our historic data. With this plan, we're proposing to use a different metric, a different monitoring metric, to try and help us understand the trajectory of a population, and that metric is the proportion of adult female in harvest. And I'm going to go into why that metric, we believe, is a nice dynamic metric to help us manage mountain lion populations. So when a lion population is primarily hunted using hounds, scientific studies suggest that various gender and age classes have a different vulnerability to harvest. This is based on hunter selectivity, but also expected daily movements of these different gender and age classes. In general, subadult males and females are most vulnerable to harvest, followed by adult males. Adult females are generally the least vulnerable to harvest because their movements are generally more restricted. Therefore, when the proportion of adult females in harvest increases, it may be attributed to the lack of other gender and age classes within the population, but in addition to that, it has impacts on future population growth, of course. Several studies support the theory that when the proportion of adult females exceeds the harvest of 20 to 25% within the harvest, the population is likely in decline. So mountain lions can be aged by examining rings seen in the cross-section of their teeth, similar to rings on a tree. In 2009, we began collecting the top premolar of harvested lions, which has allowed us to examine the different age of lions coming out of the harvest. So this didn't exist when the original 2004 plan was put in place. So under this plan, we're proposing to use the proportion of adult females in harvest as a feedback mechanism for our harvest management decisions. So I'll now cover the history of this variable in our L19 population. So in this graph, what you can see on the left-hand side axis is the proportion of adult female in harvest, and on the right-hand side is the total harvest. The bars represent the proportion of adult female, and the line represents the total harvest within the population. So for the purpose of this, we define an adult as 3 years old and older. From 2009 to 2012, we see general variability in the proportion of adult females with high of 44% in 2012 and a low of 10% in 2011. Now clearly 2012 stands out as kind of a very different year, and we speculate that could have been caused by reduced hunter selectivity caused by very poor snow conditions that year. But you see that from 2013 to 2016, we observe relatively low proportions of adult female in harvest, even though we had the highest removal rates we've observed within this DAU since the adoption of the 2004 plan. So given the high harvest rates and relatively low proportions of adult female in harvest, we believe that the current harvest rates aren't limiting this population, and additional harvest could be added while still managing for a stable population. So on to our approach. So with this plan, we're looking to try and take an adaptive management approach. We're proposing to keep the strategic goal of stable management within the population, but we also want to try and maximize our hunter opportunity for harvest. So to monitor the achievement of this goal, we've selected the threshold of less than or equal to 20% adult female in harvest on a 3-year running average as our monitoring metric. We chose 20% because it's kind of the lower threshold, represents a biological value which studies suggest is not indicative of a declining population, and we're doing it on the 3-year running average to try and lessen the impacts of year-to-year variability, which in a dynamic system we're very much likely to have. So if we're going to adaptively manage, first we have to make some type of a change and then examine the effects of that change relative to the monitoring metric. So what we're initially proposing to do is to make an initial increase of 5 lions, which we believe to be a modest increase of 5 to the harvest limit for the 2019 season, and then we're going to monitor proportion of adult females into the future. If the proportion exceeds 20% on the 3-year running average, a proposal of a reduced quota would be put before you, and if the proportion of adult females in harvest stays below 20%, then we can then analyze the need for potentially further increases within the population. So we acknowledge that The approach that we're taking is kind of new to lion management, but we think that it offers a nice adaptive approach to managing lions because it gives us a feedback mechanism that we haven't had in the past to this extent. So with that, I think I'll take any questions, Chairman Howard.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, I'll just remind you this is the first of 2 steps, so we'll have, I'm sure in January, further discussion on it. Any comments or questions right now? Commissioner Vigil.
Brian, I really like the idea of the adaptive management plan. I think it'll work down in that area very good. The last 2 years, I heard more, and it's all anecdotal, of course, of lion sightings, including them coming up on people's porches, under their decks, etc. I've seen mountain lions on my property, and I had never seen them before, but they're there. So I think, and I don't know what the last year's statistics were for the hunt because we had a lousy year. I mean, there was no snow down there all during hunting season. This year we're going to have some more snow, so the numbers might go up. So I think the adaptive management program is going to work well.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
And the folks that were at that meeting down there, I wasn't able to make it because we had a commission meeting. I think it was the Glenwood Springs meeting, if I'm not mistaken. But I think they were pretty pleased to hear that potentially there was going to be a small increase of 5 lions taken out.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's certainly feedback that we got from down there.
And I think on your graph where the number of lions jumped that one year, I think we got some better guides in the area that knew what they were doing and knew that they could recognize the difference between a male and a female, and especially a sub-adult.
Yeah, and this area has been managed for many years for voluntary reduction in female take as well. So.
Commissioner Hauser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So for the more novices of us in this area, and I'll follow up maybe offline to learn a little bit more, and in the spirit of sort of that regional conversation we had earlier, is it possible to work with other states where there might be a different balance and where there may be insufficient numbers and move these animals? Are they purely territorial where that's not their behavior? I just would like a little bit of comment on any other options on the table and if those exist.
Sure, we certainly collaborate with our neighboring states and everything. And we also, we work with also lion scientists, researchers, all of that. We have several on our staff as well. So as it relates to movement of lions, certainly there is risk there because they are a territorial species, and so survivorship of that can be kind of in question if you took that type of a management approach, I guess. Certainly hunter-harvest is sustainable. It can be managed as we're proposing here in a way that's responsible, that is effective, I guess. So not only provides opportunity, but also population management as well.
Quick follow-up. And again, somewhat naive question. I was chatting with Commissioner Bray. I mean, this is more so a trophy opportunity than it is. The utility of the animal is less than it would be if it were deer, elk, otherwise, as it relates to the actual meat. Just a little bit of commentary on that, please.
Yeah, so per our regulations, though, we do have a meat salvage requirement. And so certainly if any, and we have a mandatory check process. So if any hunter essentially, does not bring the meat out of the field, those types of things, they certainly would be cited because of the meat salvage requirement as a waste case. So yes, there is a meat salvage requirement. They are required to bring that out of the field.
And can I just make a comment there? I know this is going to sound strange, but it certainly was my experience when I have had a serving of mountain lion. It's delicious. So it's not, I know that's surprising, but it is possible. This is not just harvest the meat and then do something else with it. People do eat it. So.
Sure.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Bray.
Well, in lion management, yeah, most of these animals are taken because the hunter likes the trophy. There's no question about it. And then there is the meat requirement, but we also need to manage lions for other reasons. They're a huge predator on our mountain sheep, for example, and deer populations, not to mention domestic livestock and all those. So they need to be managed for a lot of reasons other than strictly eating, like deer and elk. Primary reason to harvest deer and elk is meat, and then the trophy is kind of secondary. This might be slightly opposite, but then we have to manage them for our other species of wildlife too.
Commissioner McDaniel.
I just wanted to add a comment that what goes back to what you said earlier today, John, about this. And I see a lot of internal struggle when it comes to talking about predators. We should be celebrating that we're raising the harvest limit. This is an indication that's a very healthy, great population of lions down there. And hunter harvest is one indicator of that. And if we can help manage that population and keep it stable, we'll have a healthy, stable lion population in that region for years to come. Ray just said, with the, I'll call it wildlife that we manage in this area. So we need to manage it so it doesn't over. This is good news for us. And I do have one question, O'Brien. Sir. I couldn't really. You then had a proportion of females that you're suggesting?
Yeah,
or
so through our regular
ask for a range instead.
But then we'll adjust it.
You were asking for latitude in the harvest limit, which I didn't see a number of what you were asking for.
No.
Thank you.
But the justification for change would be spelled out in this process. I guess that's the most important piece.
Commissioner Taylor.
And is this part of a forthcoming 10-year management plan?
Yes.
Will we see the plan at large as we come into 2019?
Yeah, so the first, with approval, I believe right now in process, the next set of harvest limit recommendations will be in January, and this plan will then also be in January. So the proposal for the increase in 5 would be at that January meeting. Does that make sense? I hope. So that season now starts April 1st and runs till March 31st of the following year. And so what we're talking about here is a harvest limit that would start and become available on April 1st of 2019.
And then on an annual basis, we would revisit the harvest limit within
right.
that 10-year management plan.
Like you do, so harvest limits are revisited statewide on an annual basis. So,
Commissioner Garcia.
So I'm just curious. So when I heard Commissioner Bray talk about the balancing sort of test and looking at the overall population of all of our wildlife, I assume that that's something we do on all of our quotas, even back when we were looking at the deer herds in Estes Park, that we are also looking at what we do with that deer herd and its effect on the elk herds and balancing all of those. It sounds sort of global, and I know that it's difficult sometimes to do that, but I assume that that's something that we do in all of our game management. Is that fair to say?
Director, you want to respond on that one?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say. Yeah, it's any wildlife is managing on the landscape. It's never static. It's particularly when you talk about lions. I mean, you can't survey them like deer. You don't see them in herds. It's so. I think what Brian has kind of laid out is what would be the opposite approach if it was over harvest. And as you can see in some of his graphs, that if we had been over harvesting, you would have seen those numbers starting to go down, and that would then be the trigger that Brian was talking about to come back. And changing landscape, people on the landscape, loss of habitat, all of those things, like you said, it's very dynamic, and it's going to take us to constantly be eyeing what's going on and then making changes and using hunting as a way to manage that all of our populations. So yeah, that's why these guys all have great jobs. It's constant, but you know, our education of lions and bears has gotten a lot better, and using science to start to drive these decisions. Back in the day, nobody cared. I mean, it was a different approach. The days of whack them and stack them and get them off the landscape is over once this commission, your predecessors before, decided to classify as big game animals, mountain lions.
And Director, I appreciate that, but I guess my question was more of, when we do this, are we also looking at the effect on the elk population individually? Are we looking at the effect of this change to those other populations?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do, along with a lot of the other factors that could drought or those things. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Vigil, and then I have public comment from Marty Holmes coming after that.
Okay, just a brief comment. Here to manage any kind of herd, whether it's because of that private land ownership.
Morning, Chairman Howard. We support, you know, the chronic wasting disease. What drives the direction for managing is to do that, and just again that we do support that. We're a science management, many of the groups are, and on some pretty important things here. It's all dynamic. We learn point, we support the agency and the biologists and the science and the data they're collecting, and Brian is very knowledgeable on the lion management issues, and we're going to, as I mentioned yesterday, we'll continue to see these kinds of issues along with bears and other issues with the predator population in the state that is challenging because of the the growth of the population. We have human population and some of the conflicts we're starting to see. So again, Brian, keep up the good work, and look forward to seeing the development of the phase 2 of the plan in January. So,
thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Mr. Lohr, I see you have a comment.
Increase the lion population, we could decrease the human growth population.
Just for our newer commissioners, Mr. Lohr is from Big Game Forever, and he and his colleague Denny Behrens are at almost every meeting, if not every meeting.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Howard. Steve Lohr, Big Game Forever, Niwot, Colorado. I just wanted to say a couple things about this study. I appreciate seeing the data and seeing the plan for the management of the mountain lions. But two things came to mind. One was for the new commissioners, and the other was the technical aspects of monitoring wild populations. The thing I wanted to point out is that the data that's coming from this study is coming from hunters. Hunting provides the information that makes decisions possible, and I wanted to emphasize that. The other thing I wanted to ask of the study is, knowing that this data comes from hunters, how do we assure that this metric isn't biased by the fact that it's coming from hunting data? And that's pretty much all I had to say.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Lohr? Steve, thanks for coming out. Okay, this is not actually an action item, so we'll see it again in January. Brian, thank you very much. Let's move on then to our next item. Mr. Grigg on the draft Buffalo Peaks Mount Silver Hills 10-mile bighorn sheep herd management plan.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chairman Howard, Director Broscheid. Appreciate you having me. I'm Jamin Grigg. I'm the wildlife biologist for the Upper Arkansas River Valley, based out of Salida. And I'll be presenting the draft RBS 5 herd management plan today. RBS 5 includes GMU's S12, which is the buffalo, S39, the Silver Heels herd, and S78, which is the 10-mile herd. Of Chaffee Lake Park and Summit counties. Elevations in the DAU run between 8,000 and 14,000 feet, so it is primarily a high elevation sheep herd. The RBS 5 population has increased since the 1980s and is currently stable at approximately 300 animals. And despite some recent pneumonia and associated lamb recruitment issues within the granite subherd of this population, which occurs between Buena Vista and Leadville, there is no historical evidence that this population ever exceeded numbers currently found within the DAU. This DAU supports both archery and rifle seasons, and the 3-year average age of rams harvested in the DAU has remained relatively stable between 6 and 8 years of age for a number of years now. Overall, hunter success is high, particularly during the rifle seasons, and 70% of hunters who were surveyed were pleased with current management guidelines for the herd. As with most wild sheep populations, interactions with domestic livestock and the resulting potential to contract pneumonia-causing bacteria is likely the biggest threat to this wild sheep population. In February of 2011, both Mycoplasma and Pasteurella were detected in the granite subherd of this population through routine sampling, and that year, no lambs within that subherd survived to the following year. Since that time, we've seen a slight rebound in lamb recruitment within that subherd. Again, we're talking about the granite subherd of this population. Lamb recruitment has rebounded slightly, but is still somewhat suppressed compared to the rest of the RBS 5 herd, which has maintained stable or even increasing lamb ratios throughout the rest of the population. Other potential impacts affecting this wild bighorn population would include increasing human recreation pressure, particularly given proximity to the Front Range. We have seen a large increase in human recreation over the last 10 or 20 years in this area. And then another potential issue would be interactions with wild mountain goats, particularly up on the northern end of this DAU. The Arkansas domestic sheep allotment, shown here in pink, overlaps with both S12 and S78 and is currently inactive. We've received confirmation from the Forest Service that they intend to leave it inactive, and we have recommended that remain inactive. The Sugarloaf Peak allotment, shown in green, overlaps with likely historic but currently unoccupied big I-70. By domestic sheep. While we acknowledge that the best thing for bighorns and S78 would be the deactivation of the domestic allotment, our current recommendation is basically to, in cooperation with the MOU that has been signed between ourselves, Forest Service, BLM, Colorado wool growers, our recommendation is to try to maintain separation between the wild sheep and the domestic sheep. So as such, what we are proposing is that essentially we would shift the boundaries of this population so that everything to the west of Highway 91 would now be S78. Everything to the east of Highway 91 would now be included in S12, running north across the 10-mile range there. And any wild bighorns that were to wander west of Highway 91 into the new S78 would be basically we would open up for harvest, so that essentially wandering sheep that wander into that area could be removed using a special management hunting license. Basically, a person could come to us, prove to us that there was a wild sheep that had wandered over into across the highway where the domestic allotment is. Show us that those wild sheep are there, and then they would be issued a special management license where that sheep would be available for harvest. And basically, this is just a proactive attempt to try to maintain separation again between the wild sheep and domestic sheep, and prevent a wild sheep from bringing a disease back to the rest of the herd. And finally, moving on to our recommended management objectives. Our recommended objective for the RBS 5 population is to maintain approximately 300 sheep with a range of 250 to 350, which is currently consistent with what we have in the DAU, and again is consistent with the highest numbers of sheep ever seen in this area or ever observed. While maintaining, again, the current 3-year average age of harvested ram of 6 to 8 years. During the public comment period, we did receive comments from Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, Western Watersheds, and others requesting an increase in the population objective. However, based on available winter range habitat and the fact that essentially there's as many sheep in this area as has ever been observed, we really don't feel like this area is capable of supporting more than 300 to 350 sheep at this time, which is currently what's there. We will attempt to achieve these objectives using both ewe and ram license allocation, and then again proactively maintaining separation between wild sheep and domestic livestock as an attempt to preserve this Tier 1 population. And with that, I can take any questions. Thank you.
Jamin, let me, just because I'm going to try and manage my time a little bit, let me take public comment from Mr. Myers from the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, and that way we'll have, when commissioners ask questions, we'll have kind of everything to talk about. For new commissioners, Mr. Myers is a frequent visitor here at the commission whenever we talk sheep, so welcome, Terry. Good to see you.
Thank you, Chairman Howard, Director Broscheid, commissioners, for this opportunity to address you today. My name is Terry Myers. I'm Executive Director of the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society. For those new faces who might not be aware, we're the only organization in this state dedicated solely to the conservation of bighorn sheep. We've been in existence for about 43 years now. I'm coming to you today from Grand Junction, which is just down the road a piece. I'm going to be brief, but I'd ask for leniency from the chairman on the 3-minute clock if I run over just a little bit. RMBS has also submitted written comments on this plan in addition to my testimony, and those are attached to the draft of the plan that you received. We appreciate staff working to generate new herd management plans throughout the state for the bighorn sheep herds that we have, which is something that was prioritized in the statewide management plan approved in 2008. So we're glad to see them moving forward with this plan. The Colorado statewide sheep population has fluctuated between about 6,500 and 7,500 for at least the last 15 years, with a recent downward trend. This is essentially the same number that was reported in the state in 1915, when, as the statewide management plan says, herds had been reduced to scattered remnant populations in the state. So we're still at the same place 100 years later. Results of the survey that were completed by staff during development of this draft plan indicated that 73% of respondents support the agency managing for increased bighorn sheep populations. And I'm sure, as you are all painfully aware by now, there were 41,000 applicants this year for about 300 sheep licenses in the state. So there's clearly very high demand. and support for increasing populations and increasing hunter opportunity. That statewide management plan expires next year, and RMBS has indicated to both staff and Director Broscheid our desire to work with staff to update that plan, which would include consideration of an increased statewide population objective for bighorn sheep to help meet some of this great demand that we have. One specific aspect of the draft management plan that we're discussing today that RMBS has concerns with is the creation of this bighorn sheep free zone in S78. We believe it sets a precedent, and while we understand and support the strategy of separation between domestic sheep and bighorn sheep, we are concerned that we don't have all the information yet to support this new concept. I think the first thing we all need to understand is what is the potential to support bighorn sheep for this bighorn sheep free zone that's being proposed. In other words, what are we sacrificing? Is this area capable of supporting 10 sheep in the future, or 50 sheep, or 150 sheep? We don't really know what we're giving up by designating this bighorn sheep free area. The second thing we all need to understand is have other options been explored by CPW with the Forest Service and the livestock producers to find other alternatives to reduce or eliminate the risk. If not, we would suggest all options be explored before a precedent is set to reduce existing bighorn sheep range within an existing herd unit on federal lands. And we would welcome the opportunity to visit with staff, final to prior recommendations being made to the Commission, to discuss various solutions and to discuss the additional data that I'm requesting today. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Myers. Stay by the podium, and Jamin, you're there as well. So, Commissioners, Commissioner Bray.
Thank you. Thank you, Terry, for your testimony. I assume your organization is a signature to the Memorandum of Understanding for that he alluded to?
Commissioner Bray, the RMBS participated in the process the first time the MOU was developed in 2007, 2008. It was ultimately signed in 2009. My organization chose not to be a signatory at that time because we felt like it limited our ability to advocate for the resource adequately. And then the MOU was renewed in 2013, 2014, and we were not given the opportunity to re-sign at that time. And that MOU, I believe, expires next year.
So I guess as a follow-up question, if I may, do you support effective separation between domestic livestock and?
Absolutely. And in fact, you know, Colorado Parks and Wildlife already has a policy in place to remove bighorn sheep when they come into contact with domestic sheep, and it's something that has happened at least 9 times, or there have been at least 9 bighorn sheep removed in the last 3 years that have come into close contact with domestic sheep. So we support that policy to protect the bighorn sheep. We're just concerned about setting a precedent of actively managing for no bighorn sheep within an area of risk, because this one area is just a small snapshot of a very large map that has a lot of risk on it throughout the state, and we're worried about the precedent that this will set. Putting the onus of separation on the state wildlife agency instead of on the federal agency that is managing the actions that are putting bighorns at risk. It's not your responsibility to manage that risk. It's the federal agency that's permitting the actions.
Well, I kind of feel, number one, there's no sheep. There may be historically been sheep in 78. We all recognize, but there's no sheep there now. And I think it's good faith on both sides. This effective separation has to be a two-way street. It can't be just all on one party or another. And I think this is a perfect example where the agency's trying to manage for a robust sheep population that's at its historical high, at least in the last 20 years. So we don't have a problem. They're trying to keep us from having a problem. So I think this separation has to be on both sides of the aisle. That's my point. Thank you.
Commissioner Garcia.
Maybe this is for the department. So this area is, it looks like what, east of 24, south of I-70, west of 91. Is that an unusually significant population of domestic sheep in that area?
Yeah, I don't know if we can pull that map back up if anybody wants to see it again, but yeah, there's actually 3 allotments in that area. There's only one of which, thank you. In the green there's actually 3 domestic allotments in there. There's only one that falls within S78, but then directly adjacent to that, there's 2 more domestic allotments that basically lead all the way down to I-70 from there. So we're basically talking about 3 domestic allotments. They're still active, only one that falls within the DAU. So even if the Sugarloaf Peak allotment were to become inactive at some point, you've still got 2 adjacent domestic allotments that are still right there. So, you know, we really don't want, I think from my perspective or from an agency perspective, we really don't want wild bighorns wandering into S78, even if the Sugarloaf Peak allotment was vacated, because you've still got 2 more that are right there next to it. So, yeah, there's a lot of domestics in that area, and it runs all the way down to I-70, and then from there it climbs up onto the flat tops. So it's a high-risk area for bighorns, for sure.
Follow-up, is the herd that the most important herd that may be creeped into that area, are they not the herd that you were identifying which had the most pneumonia risk?
Right. So, yeah, a little bit of background there. The granite subherd is a subherd of the S12 population. So of these, say, 300 sheep that are in the overall herd, there's about 100 of those, or there were about 100 of those in the granite subherd. The granite subherd is a lower elevation subherd that hangs out along the Arkansas River, essentially between Buena Vista and Leadville. When that herd contracted Mycoplasma and Pastorella in 2011, which we again detected through the routine sampling, within about a 5-year period, that subherd dropped from about 100 animals down to about 40. And we, CPW, initiated a research study to monitor lamb survival in that herd, which indicated that almost all of those lambs were dying from pneumonia, which is a common occurrence once a herd picks up these bacteria. We don't know where that bacteria came from. You know, the closest source is probably the Sugarloaf Peak domestic allotment. We don't know if that's where it came from, but that's probably the closest source. So we're trying to prevent that from happening again, basically.
Right, I understand. Final question, I'm new. Are there other, have we before had bighorn sheep free zones that was referred to?
This is the first proposal like this that I'm aware of in the state.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioners, any other comments or questions? Commissioner Zimmerman.
Thanks, Jamin. You had mentioned impacts from human recreation. I know this area quite well. It's my backyard, so to speak. The impacts from recreation, the trailheads are full year-round now, especially for peaks like Quandary, and then as Quandary gets full, you have people that are going to 13ers and 12,000-foot mountains and other mountains nearby. Can you expand on the impacts from human recreation? I don't know enough about bighorn and their reactions on if a person comes within a mile of them or a half mile of them, what do they do?
Sure. Yeah, I think just a general overview or the general concept is that wild sheep tend to avoid places of heavy human recreation pressure. And unfortunately, you know, in this area and a lot of our high peaks in Colorado, those areas tend to overlap, right? Because people are climbing 13ers, 14ers are trying to get to the top of these peaks. Well, historically, that's where a lot of these sheep were hanging out. So there's a high level of overlap between where this human recreation pressure is coming into and occurring, overlapping with what was historic bighorn range without a lot of human activity. And yeah, they, just in general, bighorns tend to avoid heavy human use areas.
Well, thanks very much. This is it. We'll see you again in January. Terry, thank you for coming from all the way from Grand Junction. Appreciate it. Next up is our draft, is it Toby or Tobe? Pronghorn Herd Management Plan. Mr. Reeds.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chairman Howard, Director Broscheid. My name is Jonathan Reitz, and I'm the Area 12 biologist based out of Lamar. I'll be presenting the draft herd management plan for the Tobe Pronghorn herd. Tobe is a large DAU in southeast Colorado encompassing more than 4,200 square miles. It's located between the Arkansas River and Colorado's border with Oklahoma and New Mexico. It includes 7 game management units and contains portions of Baca, Los Animas, Bent, Otero, and Prowers counties. Tobe is dominated by excellent pronghorn habitat, mostly in the form of shortgrass prairie shown on the map in yellow. Also on the eastern side of the DAU is a fair bit of dryland farm ground, shown in brown, and the southwest portion of the DAU contains some pinyon juniper canyonlands, shown in green. The land ownership of Tobe is primarily private, with 84% being in private ownership. Tobe offers more public pronghorn hunting opportunity, than most Eastern Plains pronghorn DAUs, with the bulk of the public land access being on the Comanche National Grasslands. This graph reflects Tobe's model population estimates and its population objectives since 1995. From 1987 to 2017, Tobe's postseason population objective has been around 1,500. Since 1987, the postseason population has ranged between an estimated 2,200 and 4,500 pronghorn. The population reached its 4,500 animal peak in 2010. Due to significant increases in hunting license numbers, the addition of a late doe-only season, and the change of all doe licenses to List B, the population has been reduced to its current estimated population of 3,500. The model estimates are based off of an intensive monitoring program that consists of annual pre-season sex age classification flights, minimum counts, and aerial line intersect distance sampling. Due to the DAU's predominance of private lands and the potential for game damage conflicts, previous herd management plan objectives were primarily driven by landowner input. This was problematic though, as landowner input was primarily sought through public meetings that received little to no landowner attendance. In an effort to get a better understanding of landowner opinions regarding pronghorn numbers, we conducted a mail survey for the current herd management plan revision. We mailed surveys to 271 randomly selected landowners and received 81 surveys. We also issued a press release that was printed in local papers, read on several radio stations that informed the public about the Tobe plan revision and offered landowners opportunity to contact CBW to comment and/or fill out a survey. We also sought hunter opinion regarding the Tobe population sex ratio. 600 surveys were mailed and 222 surveys were returned. Survey results suggest that Tobe's pronghorn population should be managed to maintain the population at its current level of 3,500. When asked if they would like to see the population increased, decreased, or maintained at its current level, the majority of landowners responded that they would like to see the population maintained at its current level. When asked the same question, the majority of hunters responded that they would like to see the population slightly increased. When asked about the buck-doe ratio, the majority of both landowners and hunters suggested that buck-doe ratios be maintained at their current observed levels. After taking into consideration results from the public surveys and our experience with managing this pronghorn herd, we're proposing that the population objective be set at a range of 3,000 to 4,000 and the postseason sex ratio be set at a range of 23 to 31. Both proposed objectives reflect what landowners and hunters have observed in recent years. The most recent post-hunt population estimate was 3,500. The population has been within the proposed population objective range 7 of the last 10 years, and estimated sex ratios have fallen within the proposed range 5 of the last 5 years. So how do we achieve these objectives? Well, we're already there, and we also have experience with managing this herd within the proposed range. The previous objective has shown to be an impractical objective that CPW has never been able to achieve. In order to drive the population down towards the previous objective of 1,500, CPW has had to continue to increase license numbers. As license numbers have been increased, the success rates have also decreased, making it necessary to further increase licenses, which then cause success rates to further decrease, so on and so forth, until landowners and hunters are both unhappy with success rates and overcrowding of hunters. In order to have achieved the previous objective, CPW would have needed to increase hunter numbers above landowner and hunter tolerance. We believe that the proposed objectives represent a balanced approach that we can manage the population within and satisfy the greatest number of hunters and landowners. Historically, the greatest significant issue in Tobe has been game damage. Population objectives and previous herd management plans were set at low levels in order to minimize game damage conflict. Both the landowner survey and the DAU's history of damage complaints suggests that pronghorn damage has not been a major issue in recent years. CPW has instituted several tools that have helped alleviate issues with pronghorn-caused crop damage. Since the establishment of the month-long December late doe season, game damage complaints in Tobe have been nearly non-existent. With pronghorn densities, when pronghorn densities do become too great on fields with growing crops, dispersal hunts be used to reduce damage and disperse pronghorn. Another significant issue in Tobe has been hunter crowding. In the hunter survey, 63% of regular season rifle hunters reported having experienced moderate to high levels of hunter crowding. Much of that crowding occurred on the Comanche National Grasslands. CPW can address some of the crowding by shifting more licenses to private land-only hunt codes. In recent years, CPW has also helped reduce hunter crowding by making all doe licenses List B and by shifting some of the regular season hunt licenses to the late season. And with that, we've come to the end of the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, this is step 1 of 2, so we'll see this one again in January as well. Comments or questions? Commissioner Vigil.
You know, I've been an advocate of using pronghorn for youth hunting. This area may be a good place to start a big game access program for youth and on pronghorn, not all big game, but do you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. Currently, it's fairly, this DAU offers a lot of public opportunities for youth. The preference points requirements are very low. It's very easy, especially for doe licenses, for a youth to get a license and even hunt on the public land. There's very little pronghorn hunting leasing that goes on. Most of it is you knock on a door and get permission fairly easily. I'd imagine landowners would be fairly interested in a big game access program, but already it is a great DAU that offers a lot of opportunities for youth.
There's a lot of open land there.
There is, yeah. I think about 12% of the DAU is the Comanche National Grasslands, and again, even on the private land side of things, it's really easy to get permission in the DAU.
Any other comments or questions? Great presentation. I just would make a suggestion to staff. Commissioner Vigil always asks a great question that makes me think a couple steps further, and one of the things that I think we've lost as a culture is the ability to go up to a farmhouse, introduce yourself, understand whether that farmhouse actually owns the land you'd like to hunt, and then ask for permission. And so I had a similar problem in a business school board that I sat on for a business school, and we put in place a 1-credit mandatory course on how to act in a conference call, how to act in a meeting, because our graduates didn't have those skills. So one of the things I would just suggest we think about for hunter safety, hunter education, is how to do that. Because I think that would help us in management, and I think we all assume that people know how to do that, and I don't think the new generations have that same skill set. So I'd love to see that maybe when we talk about hunter education next time.
Yeah, as a hunter education instructor myself, I know that I'd imagine a lot of classes out there, they do talk about that and talk about, being courteous and the importance of developing relationships with landowners, but that's definitely something that probably could be emphasized.
Great. Commissioner Vigil.
And to drive that point home, a few years ago, we opened up whitetail-only deer hunts west of I-25. And I have an electronic gate on my place, so you can't just come up to my house. But I watched a pickup drive up one day, and 2 young high school kids crossed the fence and walked up to my house, knocked on the door, and said, "Mr. Vigil, can we go and hunt whitetail on your place?" And I said, "You bet." And I said, "Do you know the outline of my place? Because it's about a mile of the Purgatory River." I said, "You've got that whole area. Go ahead." And they did a good job. They took out 2 whitetails. So that's the key, is making an effort, coming and ask with respect. And you bet, them guys were welcome back the next year also, until the whitetail got smart and don't come out in the daytime. So I think it's a good point to include that in hunter education, how to actually go to somebody's house and politely ask for permission.
Commissioner Pepler.
I agree totally with that, not just the whitetail, but we've had young gentlemen come up to our place where we live and ask, "We found out that your property is over here." So they've researched who owned that property and came to us to ask, "Can I hunt at your place 5 miles away?" I'm also very impressed with your landowner survey question. I appreciate that you do that and go to that length.
You bet.
Thank you, Commissioner Pepler. Any other comments or questions? Jonathan, thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Ms. Rogers on one of our RFPs. Welcome, Ms. Rogers.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners and Director Broscheid. My name is Kim Rogers, and I am the new Real Estate Section Manager for CPW. For those of you who have been on the Commission for some time, you know my predecessor, Ann Kelson. Ms. Kelson needed to permanently reduce her work hours for health reasons, and I have been serving as her permanent replacement since October the 15th of this year. This morning, I am here to ask you to consider a unique circumstance regarding a project of ours, the Gunnison Partnership Ranches RFP project. For those of you who are new to the Commission, the RFP project is a program where Colorado landowners submit projects to CPW for funding consideration under the Colorado Wildlife Habitat Program. In the RFP application for this project, 8 properties in 3 counties with different owners were submitted in a single RFP. The goal to achieve 8 separate third-party conservation easements. This is the first project of its kind with regard to so many parcels in different counties and with different owners. And because of that situation, the closing process is complex, and that's from a logistical point of view. It's very complex. So as a result, it's really not practical for the transactions to close in a single day at a single title company. So I'm here to ask you for 2 things. One, to consider if you allow us to close the 8 third-party conservation easements separately as it becomes feasible to do so. And then if you do approve of that approach, I'm also here to ask for your consideration to allow us to close the first 3 of those 8 projects because they're ready to close. And knowing that I will return to the Commission in the future for specific approvals for each of the subsequent conservation easements.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers.
Certainly.
Comments or questions, Commissioners? I just had a quick comment then, Ms. Ryder. What happens if you close the first 3 and some of the subsequent ones, something happens, you're unable ever to close them? How does that impact the project?
Well, my understanding is that each one of these projects stands on its own as a quality project with quality wildlife habitat. So although it's not preferred, and we have no reason to think that they won't close, everything is progressing, certainly it is a possibility. But these projects were all brought together because they share unique, they were all targeted when we had the Gunnison sage grouse as a priority, and that exists on all these properties. So they were put together in a partnership situation for that purpose. They do also support moose, elk, deer, a wide variety. So, but each one does stand on its own. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
This is an action item as well, I think, right? So, Commissioner Vigil.
Comment. This is key sage grouse habitat
Yes, sir.
also, so that's a real key.
Yes, that's what the name of the project is, the Gunnison Partnership Ranches Project. So,
Commissioner Garcia.
I wasn't here. I'm sure this group approved this RFP at some point.
yes, sir, that's correct.
And so was there any thought at that time about this issue, knowing that there were all of these separate easements involved?
Honestly, that was before my time with CPW, so I don't know. I think the value of, in real estate, we're here to solve problems and get things done. And honestly, we're here today out of, just showing some extra caution because it's a little bit unusual for us to do this. So
I understand. Just curious.
Yeah, certainly.
Counsel, you had a comment there?
Yes, sir. I think I can touch on your question, Commissioner Garcia. I agree with Ms. Rogers that real estate is here sort of out of an abundance of caution to keep you informed. There are a number of conditions of approval that the Commission imposed when you originally approved this transaction, and a single sort of simultaneous close was not one of those requirements. And I would note that there is 95% partner leverage in the deal as a whole. So with that, I think I fully agree with her statement that she's really just coming here to inform you and keep you apprised of what's going on.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Counsel. Commissioner Zimmerman.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the staff recommendation or
I'll
request.
second that, too.
Commissioner Zimmerman moves. Commissioner Vigil seconds. Any public comment? I don't have any blue slips. Seeing none, let's do this by voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, Laura. Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank you
Rogers.
so much. I look forward to working with you in the future.
And we do too. Thank you very much. Next up is public comment. I have 2 blue slips here. I'm going to start first with Mr. Moore. Welcome, Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Justin Moore. Been a resident of Colorado since 1986. The only time I've ever left was to play around with the Marine Corps for 4 years. I wanted to take this time to introduce myself as the owner and operator of the Colorado Leftover Watch mobile app. Working within the parameters that Mr. Corey Chick set forth earlier on in the year, what we do is monitor the leftover list, and we alert our users when specific hunt codes that they're watching for become available for purchase through the reissue process. Our goal this year was to 1, make the app old guy proof, and to 2, get as much feedback from our users as we could to make an even better product for next year. I'd like to believe that we met both those goals with flying colors. Whether you're banging nails on a roof, wrenching on a car underneath the hood, or pushing a shopping cart with 2 little kids in tow, our app brings a great amount of accessibility to all sportsmen for these highly coveted reissued tags. I'm also very proud to say that a portion of our proceeds go towards the Rocky Mountain Bighorn Society, as I used to be a member of the board of directors for them. So I'd like to leave you with two things. One, thank you from every sportsman that has ever purchased a leftover tag with or without my app. The opportunities that you folks work so hard to create for us can only be measured in smiles. The second thing is, I'd like to make myself available for any questions, concerns, or comments that you might have, and I'll open that up to you now, but in the essence of time, you can also send me an email to justin@leftoverwatch.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Comments or questions, commissioners? Commissioner Vigil.
I almost thought you insulted me when you talked about old guy proof.
You can take it as an insult if you'd like.
That's okay to a fellow Marine. Thank you.
Hoorah.
Any other comments or questions? Well, thanks for coming all the way out to present, and what a great story. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. You folks have a good one.
Too. Next up is Mr. White.
Thank you. I have a prop that I'd like to bring out here to begin with. But before I do that, I would like to say an expression of gratitude for facilitating my being here today. It was late. People stretched a little bit to make sure that we could do this. And I would also like to say that this delivery is going to be different. The museum here kindly let me borrow one of their artifacts. And I'd like to use that for some emphasis here. Now, who here skis or snowboards? Hold up your hands.
Mr. White, if you don't use the microphone, I'm not in compliance with state law, so if you could...
Is that better?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we have three. Now, I'm old enough to have begun on one of these, but I'm pretty old. And I've been wearing protective equipment for a long time. Of our three skiers here, do you wear helmets? 1, 2, everybody wears helmets. That's good. This equipment is here as a prop because this is an illustration of where the sport was when the Ski Safety Act was written. It may have been just a little tiny bit ahead of that, but it was a whole different sport and a whole different world than it is now. Now, there was advanced materials sent, including this presentation that we're looking at here. There was a number of links to videos in there, and there was a fair amount of attachments. Can I have a show of hands as far as who has read that material?
Mr. White, you know, if you could present, I'm not really used to having people poll the commission. We're here to hear what you have to say, but...
Okay. I'll do my best. I have a autotelic personality that doesn't necessarily enable me to be the most compliant. I'm sorry for that.
That's okay. I'll keep reminding you.
Okay. Thank you so much. So the graphic that you're looking at here really is a metaphor for the cover letter. And bottom line up front, I'm here to illustrate the fact that we have a law-breaking problem on the ski slopes, to reveal an enforcement gap associated with that law-breaking problem. We've done extensive surveys and interviews to validate the legitimacy of that, to identify the stakeholders and beneficiaries in that, and to furthermore have a suggested pathway and seek commitment. Next slide, please. This is an illustration which is way, way too busy, but fast forward through the whole thing. There's an annual event at ski areas usually called the Pond Skim, last day of the year. They build a pond at the bottom of the mountain. People ski down. They try and get across the pond of water with their skis and their snowboards. It's a lot of fun. It usually begins the night before with a big party and continues the morning of with a big party. This particular event here happened in April of this year at Copper Mountain. Copper Mountain introduced something relatively new to the pond skim, and that is a terrain park built associated with the pond skim at the bottom of the mountain. People ski down fast. They jump from kickers. They do inverted aerials. They do aerials into the pond. There's a whole lot of things that happen there. The park is surrounded by public, kind of like the parks in the middle here where the ski is. The public is around the places where you all are sitting. And the public are basically endangered through this. And in this particular circumstance, the image is a little hard to understand, but there's an upside down skier there. He went off the kicker and landed upside down in the crowd. He was identified as being intoxicated. There's a number of law-breaking occurrences there, recklessness, intoxication, and a terrain park that was built in a dangerous configuration. The perpetrator was charged. The police were called. They arrived an hour and a half late to the scene. There was no legitimate alcohol content measurement that could be taken at the time. Eventually, there was a guilty plea. The perpetrator got off light. Now, amongst the videos that I sent, did I send you the video about 5.5-year-old Elise Johnson from northern Wyoming? Yes?
Again, Mr. White, if you send it to us, we've reviewed it. I'm just uncomfortable having you polling commissioners for what they've reviewed or not.
I'm trying to gauge where I can move quickly and where I need to linger. So thank you. So we can go on to the next slide. People have seen Elise, they know the story. This here is a Colorado map of the ski areas, and what it shows in a nutshell is a couple of big red circles which indicate the places where the law enforcement officials rebuffed multiple opportunities to be interviewed or to participate in the sampling, and well, it wasn't sampling, it was an extensive measurement of what happens on the ski slope with respect to law enforcement. The green indicators at Monarch, Vail Beaver Creek, at Eldora, and at Snowmass represent places where law enforcement is on the slope in some fashion or other to make sure that ski safety laws are sustained and recklessness endangerments are minimized. The graphic neglects law enforcement officials from U.S. Forest Service who are sprinkled here and there in a fashion that is not methodical but is somewhat contributing to the enforcement. They're occasionally on the slope, but they have no authority to do anything on the slope. I'll take questions for that later on. Next slope. Next, please. This is a representation of what I and my group see as a vision of the future. We see families, we see safe people on the slopes, we see essentially growth and prosperity in the business. We would like for this to happen, but there are barriers in place of this happening. Next slide, please. This is an indication of the commitment and only a small sampling from the advocacy group that I represent here today. Now, the letter from Horst is too small to read. I have a handout here that I would like to distribute. Is that allowed?
Yes, that's fine.
Sorry about the moment to get this done here.
Easy, wow.
Somebody can take this and pass it on. I appreciate that. Thank you. Horst Abraham. Horst Abraham is a Ski Hall of Famer. He's part of our group. I've highlighted different sections of what he says here, but bottom line, he's saying the intent of our advocacy group is to engage various entities, of which CPW is one, to help to generate a robust dialogue, resulting in improved accident prevention methodologies. I enthusiastically support the efforts of this group and hope you'll join with us to keep the sports we treasure for all involved safe and enjoyable as possible. It doesn't say so here, but Horst is a professor. He's in his mid-70s, he's working strong, and he's in Singapore right now. Next slide, please. Stakeholders, very quickly stepping through this, we move from the top left where we indicate CPW, that is your logo there, is that correct? Top left?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And this is a direct quote from the interview work that we've done with respect to CPW. Basically, CPW see that the U.S. Forest Service has more duty and is likely to be a stakeholder that would possibly take more action. And then below that, we have the U.S. Forest Service's logo and what they say about it. And they believe that the matter is for the ski industry rather than themselves. Then there's a little arrow that takes us to Colorado Ski Country USA, who is a trade group. And I've underlined their primary functions are concentrated in marketing, public policy, and public relations. That's what they're about. Do I have anything more to say on that? Yes, bottom left, what we have here is an indication of the law enforcement agencies which are active, and God bless them for that. I've had extensive conversations and face-to-face with these people, and they've got some really good contributions to make. Upper right, we have NSP, that means National Ski Patrol. I linked their mission. That mission reads really well, but in fact, Ski Patrol are not out there to keep you safe. They're out there to put you on that toboggan and apply CPR and emergency first aid and get you to the medical center. That's what they do. So they're not there to help keep you safe. Beneficiaries, next slide, please. This is the family experience that we all esteem and love. These young children and the mother associated with them belong safe on the mountain, and they're being endangered through a gap in enforcement. Next slide, please. This sounds outrageous, doesn't it? That there's 600,000 accidents a year. This has come from Silver Star Mountain. It comes from a Brit that they nickname as Griff, who's tough, no-nonsense manager of Ski Patrol there. This is all facts and data founded. There's no doubt about this information, and we validated this several different ways. Next, please. I need to skip through that slide, but please pay attention to the trend that is indicated there with respect to injuries associated with collisions. Skip that next slide, please. With that, I indicate here a slide. I'm out of order. Can we back up one? Yeah. All right. This is the terrain park at the bottom of Copper Mountain for the pond skim, where the accident occurred that created injuries and resulted in someone eventually being charged and filed. Okay? All the hoo-ha about that was to do with the accident and how bad it was, and somebody really got hurt there, and you know, the police showed up late to the scene. I'm an engineer. I understand mechanics. I understand physical domains. I taught skiing for 9 years at Telluride. I know this world. That pond skim terrain park has inherent dangers built into it. You can see how close the crowd is to the perimeter there. There's too much chance that those people will become hurt with an accident, and that did indeed happen. Next slide, please.
Mr. White, we're at 12 minutes, so if you could kind of
wrap up?
Well, wrap up and get to your ask, I think would be the way I would describe it.
All right. Well, I think we're, let's just skip ahead here to keep on skipping. All right, here's where we go. This is our ask. I have another prop. Can I bring it out?
Please.
In monitoring data that comes from both the ski industry and CPW, they identify the number of participants associated with your domains. The ski industry in Colorado has about 12 million visitor population through the winter season. CPW has very close to the same number through the 12 months a year. About the same size as those two balloons right there. Now, I don't have a balloon to illustrate this, but I would say this, that the amount of attention given by CPW towards the ski industry as opposed to everything else, and all those other things are very legitimate. I mean, wildlife, hunting, fishing, ecology, all of those things are perfectly legitimate, and I esteem them as well. But nonetheless, there's a tremendous imbalance in the amount of effort that's being put there. If I got it right, there's 874 full-time equivalents in this organization. Is that right?
It sounds about right.
Yeah, and $174 million annual budget. Is that about right?
It's actually a little higher.
Okay, and how much of that, those two things, would be devoted towards the ski industry?
I don't think we know that, do we, Director? I would agree with your general assumption that it's not a large number.
Small number. So my suggested action is this, that there be a summit conference convened that would involve this organization and a representative